Hello everybody, welcome back to my thoughts series on Destiny 2, the State of Destiny 2 series that has been going on for quite some time now, and I am Phantom139. If you're new here, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. Today's video, at the end of June, is going to focus on the launch of Season of Arrivals, Season 11, the reveal of the fall expansion Beyond Light, and my final closing thoughts on Season of the Worthy and the controversial topics that have been going on in the community since the previous video, as well as recent topics as well. So let's jump right into it. First and foremost, let's just give a quick recap of the previous video I did, which was in April, and that was the mid-season update for Season of the Worthy, discussing the kind of broken and failed state of Grandmaster, the failed broken event that was Guardian Games, and the whole notion of how Season of Competition was ruining the game. We talked about the major issues that Bungie introduced into the game and how they effectively broke Pinnacle gear progression by allowing non-Pinnacle activities access to Pinnacle drops, and unfortunately this is still the case. And then I kind of followed this up with a whole secondary video, a very long video, on my thoughts on how I would actually fix all of these numerous issues in Destiny 2. And that's kind of where the April videos left everything off. So shifting gears now, we move into my personal closing thoughts on Season 10, and I can pretty much summarize this in one sentence, and that is, thank the Lord this terrible season has come to a pitiful conclusion. Season 10 was, without a doubt in my mind, the absolute worst we have seen Destiny 2 in for any seasonal content drop. Hell, I even think Season of the Drifter, which, as many of you know from a video I did before, was a very bad season. I even think that this was better than Season of the Worthy, in my personal opinion. I sincerely hope that Bungie takes a very good hard look at what they did in Season 10, and then plaster sticky notes on every employee's machine at Bungie's studio, showing Season 10 as a perfect example of how not to make another season of Destiny content. So what went wrong? Well, let's just kind of do a quick recap of the blunders of Season 10. And first and foremost, and front and center, the complete neglecting of the PvE player base in the season with the public event Bunker Loop, which was beyond boring and monotonous even after a few hours on the first day of the season, with no relief in sight for the remainder of the 3-month season. Secondly, we had the continued pushing of bounties as the sole source of progression in the game. Then there was the terrible launch of Trials of Osiris and the continued blunders of forcing development time towards a mode that was effectively dead on arrival in the given state of it. I even talked about why this was going to fail ahead of time, but, you know, who listens to me anyways? Then we had Guardian Games, the broken event progression of it, regardless of whatever excuse Bungie tried to give, saying that their algorithm was correct. We all saw that it was failed and broken. There was a complete lack of any new content beyond the middle point of the season, and this was more so an excuse for the quote-unquote and more on their seasonal calendar, and more means and nothing else. Grandmaster Nightfall's terrible launch, and the lackluster loot that went along with it, or should I say, nothing meaningful at all. And then, of course, the bugs that riddled most of the seasonal content, including the only seasonal quest we got at the end, and the nature of the quest being so bad that Bungie was forced to hotfix a change for the regression of it. So yeah, it was a very bad season. I mean, there were a few things that Bungie did right, in my opinion, and I talked about it. The weekly progression of the story in the Bunker Map Wall, the approach of the Almighty, and the eventual endgame destruction of it. Those were all handled very well, and I hope at least a few pages are taken from these aspects of the season to model future events and story progression by. But for the rest of the season, no, don't ever do anything like that again. So, closing thoughts on Season 10, how do I rate it? Well, no surprise here, I mentioned this in the April video. The final rating I give this is a 3 out of 10, and honestly, they should be thankful it hasn't dropped any further than a 3 out of 10. So each of the individual scores below, stories 5 out of 10, and I say here that this retains the 5. The story element delivery matched the first week throughout the entire season, if not falling back a bit without any closing cutscenes at the end of the season, but the end-game event that kind of wrapped up the story was done rather well, regardless of community complaints of the duration of it. Endgame, 3 out of 10. I gave a slight bump here due to the challenge aspect of Grandmasters, but the season as a whole failed your in-game players, so yeah, not much there. Community efforts, that is a very low score there, 2 out of 10. And Bungie, when your community Reddit is calling for purposeful failing of your community event of the season, you know you done messed it up. And I'm I'm baffled. And, honestly, you need to change your ways on that. Grind, 2 out of 10, down from the 4 I gave at the start of the season, and the 2 points I cut here was due to absolutely no changes to any kind of bounty progression and for sunsetting issues that were introduced. I'll discuss that in a bit, but we'll just do that for a bit. Exotics, I bumped this up 2 points because Heir Apparent was pretty good. I mean, the score is still mediocre because there was no fun exotic challenges this season. And then nothing to relate for any kind of secrets of the season because, nothing there. So this is me closing the books on this terrible Season 10, and I never want to talk about Season 10 again, folks. Let's just, in my mind, it's gone. I don't even want to think about this anymore. I don't even want to pretend that this season existed. That's how bad it was. So let's get off of this topic and move into the thoughts on the reveal of Beyond Light, the fall expansion. So first and foremost, if Bungie hasn't shown us that they can pull off some spectacular reveals, I don't know what to tell you, folks, because they do this every year, and my gosh, they succeed every year at making things that look fairly impressive. So what are the big takeaways? We get a new major destination in Europa, a brand new element for the first time in the history of the franchise, and subsequently new subclasses revolving around this new element. Oh, by the way, did I mention that these subclasses will also have the old style nodes from D1, the first quote-unquote leeway into a potential subclass 2.0. What's not to be excited about? Now, I know that a lot of you are sitting there like, well, this whole year was showing why Bungie can't be trusted, and here's my thoughts, folks. I personally think that what happened was sometime in the middle of Forsaken, which was year 2, was when Bungie cut ties with Activision. And when this happened, the original year 3 plan, which was going to be the Dreadnought based on the ending cutscene from Destiny 2, was scrapped in favor of Bungie's new Eras model. So, launching Shadowkeep instead. And the whole plan moving forward in one title instead of, starting a Destiny 3. So in turn, what happened is all of the work that was being done for year 3, the original year 3, was scrapped at that point, gone. And instead, the year 3, being the Shadowkeep release and the seasonal model, was compressed into a short time span. So looking at what's being shown for the fall release, it's easy to see that Bungie can actually do a lot more than people actually think, because this time around, they were actually able to put all of their time forward and put everything for this release. I'm very excited that there's a foundational plan in place for the next 3 years of the franchise. So we get Witch Queen in 2021 and Lightfall in 2022. And even more, we have the foundational goal for full crossplay by fall of 2021. Additionally, there is news that content will be cycled in and out, including Destiny 1 content, with the return of the Cosmodrome at the launch of the expansion, as well as the Vault of Glass raid from Destiny 1 at some point in year 4. I personally think this will be Season 14, which is when some of the old raid gear will be expiring. I'll have some more thoughts on the DCV in a bit, but all in all, this looks really good, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's coming down the pipeline. So that's all I have on the fall expansion right now, mainly because there's not really much else to talk about. So let's shift topics into something that there is quite a bit to talk about, and that is Season 11, my first impression. So let's talk Season of Arrivals, and I will say at a first impression standpoint, I'm much more pleased with Season 11 than I was with Season 10, but again, let's be honest, anything is better than Season 10. And folks, if I haven't made it perfectly clear, don't ever do Season 10 again, Bungie. Never. The opening story mission, along with our first pyramid ship reveal on Io, has the story finally moving somewhere. They even drop a little bit of tease for the fall 2021 expansion, Witch Queen, by interjecting Savathun into the story of this season. On the other hand, however, you quickly find out that Season 11's loop is nearly identical to that of Season 10's, with a new public event, and 2 new currencies which are used to fuel another Seraph Bunker style upgrade tree. Key difference here, however, is that the execution of the public event and the upgrade season compared to Season 10 was done much better. Additionally, there is actually an aspirational activity, a new in-game activity, a dungeon prophecy for this season, and this was noted by Luke Smith as an apparent apology to the PvE player base for the quote-unquote season of competition. And after getting pummeled in this dungeon and fully going through it a few times, I have to say, Bungie, well done. Again, Bungie can't seem to crack through the recent trends of having game-breaking bugs in their content at release. For example, the new grenade launcher was broken such that bosses could be insta-killed. Sprint mapping was broken, but this has been fixed. Players were exploiting an AFK farm in forges for umbral engrams, and speaking of umbral engrams, those were also broken. They were giving powerful drops, so everyone kind of skipped the seasonal power grind that way. And triumphs, there's quite a few of them that are still bugged. So unfortunately, the whole notion of bugged content at release, that's still going on. Also, from what I've seen in the triumphs list, it would appear as if the season will be changing in terms of the public event offerings as well as the story mission from week to week to keep things fresh, which I can appreciate. So let's kind of pull things together here. What do I say in terms of what we've been seeing so far as an initial rating for the season? And no surprises, folks, this is going to be a lot better than the Season 10. So first and foremost, story, I actually give Bungie a 7 here. The execution at the start of the season was a major step up, and having a full mission introduce the season versus a cutscene, and should I say in addition to a cutscene, or 2 for that matter, was definitely a major plus in my eye. I just wish things were fleshed out a bit more and more chronologically correct, and by that I mean if you remember the very first cutscene, you see Rasputin explode in the cutscene, but go ahead and take a trip to Mars and go to the Rasputin room. He's perfectly fine, folks. That's, yeah, minus a few points for chronological stuff there, Bungie. Endgame, 7. I have to give a good score because of the dungeon, but there are a couple of downsides, and that's where the points off come from. And these are from the lack of relevant raid content. I mean, there's still only Garden of Salvation for Pinnacle gear. And then the changes to Grandmasters for the rewards are still laughable. I mean, yeah, guaranteed Ascendant shards, but we'll talk sunsetting and armor here in a bit. It's not good enough. Nothing in terms of community efforts, so I can't rate any scores. Grind, I have to give it an average score of 5. Seasonal grind has had no adjustments from the previous season. We're still on bounties. It's a primary farming method, although the new umbral engrams and the ability to focus the drops of said umbral engrams does improve the feeling of the grind a bit, so I have to give a few points here. Exotics, 4 out of 10, so we dropped a point. What happened? There was a broken, overpowered grenade launcher, and I rate a 4? Well, what gives? So there's only other 2 exotics that we know of coming this season, and one of them is a crappy sidearm, folks. It looks terrible on paper. Trace rifle does look a bit interesting, but we know very little about it. Maybe we'll be surprised with a secret later in the season. We haven't had a secret mission at all this year, so who knows, maybe we'll get something. And then we didn't get any exotic armor this season, so kind of meh in terms of exotics. And again, where's my dungeon exclusive loot, Bungo? I want dungeon exclusive loot. Make it happen. So we put everything together and we get a pretty good score for this for starters. I mean, 6 out of 10, kind of still average, but I mean, it's better than Undying and Worthy, but maybe not quite as good as Dawn was at its launch. But we'll see how things develop over the next few weeks, and we'll chat about this later on. And by that I mean probably at the end of the season. All right, moving on, we got to hit some controversial topics. So first and foremost, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is sunsetting. So this is Bungie's answer to players continuing to use the same pieces of gear, mainly pinnacles, and not branching out to the newly created gear introduced with each seasonal update. This is how Bungie is going to control things like Recluse and Mountaintop without nerfing what makes these weapons unique. So the basic gist of things is now gear has a shelf life, and that shelf life is 1 year with the exception of raids, which will be 6 seasons, from which power of each piece may only be increased to a specific point and then will no longer be able to carry forward. While the notion of this change means the gear can still be used in the general game, by that I mean Patrol, non-playlist strikes, Standard, Gambit, and Crucible, mid-game activities and in-game activities will no longer be able to carry these pieces in your arsenal. Now, on paper, this sounds very troubling, especially given Bungie's track record from the past year. Now, I personally understand Bungie is wanting to avoid power creep, but I literally discussed means by which this could have been completely avoided in my previous video. They've also pushed forward 2 other major issues with this whole sunsetting notion. First, any legendary piece with an Eververse item attached to them are now effectively worthless, so that's loss of investment. And then Bungie reintroducing duplicates of sunset items and forcing players to regrind for them again. Neither of those are good. My personal thoughts is that power creep is perfectly fine in the game, especially since players are wanting to return to the original feel of the power fantasy element of continual growth and strength of their player. If Bungie's really too afraid of players becoming too powerful, then honestly they just need to take a page from the Division series and introduce difficulty levels on activities to allow players to up the challenge artificially via deltas on power or modifiers. Additionally, raids and RNG and weekly lockouts. I say this every single video, but given that raids have a weekly lockout, there is now a distinct possibility that players will never earn a piece of gear from a raid and be able to use it in the course of an item's lifespan. It's entirely possible that someone's bad RNG can effectively lock them out from ever earning a reward now, especially given the fact that raids can be sunset and even worse, be put into the DCV for who knows how long. So that's one thing that I really hope that Bungie changes in the fall. Just drop the whole weekly lockouts and rewards. Make the first drop pinnacle and then hard cap the subsequent drops. I'll say this again and again. I also take issue with reissued weapons. I have a lot of attachment to some guns that Bungie has already reissued. Some of them have high kill counters and really good rolls on them. And if Bungie made it so old gear that has been reissued could just be re-upped without losing the roll or the counters, that would make the sting of sunsetting hurt a lot less per se. So make it happen. Finally, armor sunsetting. This is a terrible idea, Bungie. And to slap on top of this, given the fact that the amount of investment required on some items is atrocious in the context of some players, this can dent the entire Masterwork system's usage as a whole. I already have friends who are saying they are never going to masterwork another piece of armor again. This will invalidate a huge portion of the game's grind element, as players will rapidly lose interest in investing on gear pieces that will become irrelevant for endgame use really quickly. I really think that armor sunsetting just needs to not happen. I mean, you can do weapons, but just take into consideration what I said about re-upping, and then maybe just drop this whole thing as a whole. I'm still really sitting heavily on the fence here, but I think the vast amount of negatives here warrant a serious relook at what you're trying to accomplish. I don't think this is going to bode well with many players, and I feel some dedicated grinders are going to start having second thoughts about continued engagement with the new system in place. So that's my thoughts on sunsetting. So next up, let's talk the DCV, which is the Destiny Content Vault. This is Bungie's answer to the game becoming too big to sustain. This is basically a vault of content, having both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 content that can be put away from the game or be brought back out to be active at any time, although it kind of seemed like Bungie was saying that this would only apply to fall expansions. From a technological standpoint, I think this is a good idea to keep file sizes in check, such that Destiny doesn't eventually become the largest game on a machine, or in extreme cases of low power consoles owning more than 25% of the disk space usage, although I can already think of a few cases where this might be the case. Feeling-wise, however, I do have a concern when it comes to the duration that some content will be in the vault, especially when it comes to having old in-game content that can be enjoyable to engage with from time to time, disappear from the game and become unplayable for extended periods of time. In some extremes, it could be more than a year before it comes back. I also fear that some content I personally enjoy playing, such as old raids, could be vaulted and then just never brought out of the vault again. Or if they are, they just won't be made relevant and just be filler content and then just be thrown back into the vault after a few months of time. I do like that old D1 content will return in some regards, especially if we can get the fresh coat of paint on it and then have some story relevance interjected into it to explain why we're going back to those old locations. If I had to give a recommendation here for Bungie, I would say consider releasing a secondary free-to-play title that contains the DCV content for players to engage with when it goes into the DCV. Allow players to load up their D2 characters into this title and engage with all the content it will. Maybe just disable loot drops if your tech can't handle, although I don't see why this is impossible. This way, players who still want to play the old content can do so at their hard content. I mean, they can choose to install the other title and just play the DCV content whenever they want. And the main title can remain at the forefront, and underutilized content can shift to the DCV, while the new stuff can sit at the forefront and remain constantly updated. Whereas the DCV content, it's put in the DCV, there's no updates to it, and then the only thing that gets updated is what content goes in or out of the DCV. My big take here is that while I think this will be a good thing for the game as a whole, I fear that eventually we're going to reach some kind of an endpoint and content will be vaulted for good and never come back. So again, this is why I think a separate free-to-play title is going to be needed here for the DCV items, while D2 remains the active title. So that's pretty much all I have for Season of Arrivals, Fall Expansion, and controversial topic thoughts. Although we're still dealing with a few issues with the game, I am a bit more optimistic about the future of the title versus previous videos. I still feel like some things I mentioned in my previous hour-long video, talking about the ways I'd fix the game, would do wonders for improving some of the many issues with Destiny 2 as it stands right now. Personally, as it stands for me, I don't think anything major is going to happen this season that will warrant another video for me anytime soon, so probably this will be the only Destiny video for Season 11, unless something happens, but, it's Destiny. Things can change, and when it does, I will be here for thoughts if they are required. So, that's all for the June video. If you've hung around for this long, thanks for watching. Be sure to leave your own thoughts below, and I will see you in the next State of Destiny 2 video. Farewell.